On the last episode of the Mughal Empire story, Sultan Timurtas celebrated a little too hard at the birth of his new heir and died of alcohol poisoning, leaving his 0-year-old son Timurtas II the throne. This is certainly going to be a tenuous time for the rising Mughal Sultanate, given that Timurtas II is a bit of a dark horse for the throne. Many in the realm would have preferred that the new Sultan's uncle, Jahangir, took the throne, given his relative age and respectable personality. That being said, Jahangir was still only 16, and rather than being an opportunist pretender, he instead sought to work alongside his nephew to create a stronger realm. After all, looking north, Jahangir, and even some of the more hawkish vassals of the realm, could see a dangerous threat looming over the mountains. The very namesake of the Mughal Sultanate was raging through the steppes, and there was no telling when India would be their next target. Even the Gurkhani family branch left behind in Uzbekistan more than a century ago was subjugated by Jochi Borjigin and his Mongol hordes. More importantly though, it looks like some of the more ambitious Rajas of Gujarat and Rajputana had their eyes on what they perceived to be a weakening Mughal grip on the Indus River. Within a few years, Timurtas II was growing into a stronger sultan, but before he could even reach maturity, the Jatanbalid Raja from Gujarat made a move to take the mouth of the Indus from the young sultan. Little did the ambitious Raj know that the only thing preventing a Mongol incursion into India itself was the Mughal Sultanate and its strong grip on the Indus River and Hindu Kush mountains. Some kings just can't see beyond their own blinding ambitions. Thankfully, Jahangir, as Timurtas' leading advisor, quickly put down the Gujaratis and led a lightning war to enforce a white peace between the two. No one in the Mughal Sultanate had an interest in a prolonged war. Thankfully, Jochi, Genghis' son, passed away and left the throne to a small child, Chagatai. Is that like Chagatai but a different spelling, or a completely different name? A child on the Mongol throne meant India would be safe for a little bit longer. As Timurtas was growing up, he was developing an interesting personality to say the least. Heading into his second decade of life, he was a callous and yet trusting person. I'm struggling to think of what that would actually look like in terms of a real human. I suppose it evokes the image of an unemotional delegator, like a middle manager. I'm sorry to hear you had a car accident, Bob, but I'm afraid you'll still have to come in on time or else I'll be firing you. I trust you'll be arriving on time. Something like that, I guess? Around 1220, the first civil war of the realm was brewing, as the vassals took the recent death of the Mongol Khan and the relative pacification of the Gujaratis as a sign that external threats were no longer on the table. This faction just wanted a reduction in crown authority. Fearing that a civil war might reawaken the Rajputs and Gujaratis, Timurtas granted their demand, and the realm became pretty decentralized, but it remained at peace. The major lesson he took away from the demands of his vassals was that, at the end of the day, most things are better left undisturbed, and he became a content teenager. His vassals were ecstatic at the news, although Jahangir was a little concerned with how easily manipulated his nephew had become. Entering adulthood, Timurtas was a well-educated man with a focus on the self. His intention for the realm was mostly to keep the peace and run a stable, wealthy, and prepared sultanate. No matter his content nature, the fear of Mongol invasion kept any sort of ambitious sparks snuffed out. That being said, Jahangir advised his nephew that he ought to assert some kind of power into the world and let both the vassals and neighboring kings know that the Mughals were not something to be ignored. With that, he declared a war against the Rajputs to take some of the fertile farmlands of the Gangetic Plains, which up to now were split between the rival realms. Unfortunately, largely in part to Timurtas' lackadaisical attitude towards war, his armies were utterly crushed by the Rajputs, who had been themselves building up for war in the near future. After reorganizing the army and going in to now fight on the defensive, the army was once again crushed and retreated back to Delhi. In one last battle on the outskirts of Delhi, it looked like the Mughal army would face a third defeat, and so Timurtas, embarrassingly, signed a surrender to the Rajput and paid out well beyond his means to them. A sum of more than 4,000 gold pieces was sent to the Rajputs, who laughed all the way back home to Rajasthan. It seemed clear to everyone in the region that Timurtas was a weak sultan. The upcoming debt crisis would be Timurtas' first genuine roadblock as sultan. He'd have to try and make some of the money he lost back so that he could avoid his very subjects rising up against him. In an extremely foolish maneuver, he gave away one of his richest fiefs, Lahore, to a knight who felt he deserved a reward for his service in the Rajput wars. Why a knight who lost a war ought to be rewarded, I do not know. It was probably more of a misunderstanding on the Sultan's part, who was busy dealing with other issues. This was particularly painful due to the recent reduction in crown authority, which made any attempt at revoking titles impossible. Taking a step back from the kingly politics, at the local level, the Urdu culture has been slowly developing into a more and more Indianized culture. Back during the reign of Prithvipeda, the Urdu culture took on the Lords of the Elephant tradition, making Urdu people the only ones to have mastered both horseback and elephant-back archery. The strong martial customs of the culture paved the way for local Khadga Puja celebrators, who had been performing all sorts of strange rituals with their weapons. From the eyes of the more devout Muslims of Mughal society, this was pretty unacceptable, but after more than a century of intermingling, Khadga Puja became a part of even the strongly Muslim Urdu culture, largely due to a shared love and respect for war and its weapons. After some time of mostly idling about, Timurtas was able to recover the immense royal debt and was also blessed with his first son, who he named Jahangir after his beloved uncle. He then, almost immediately after, had another son with his second wife, who he named Akbar. Sometimes, a simple name is best, he thought. All that celebrating was cut short, though, by another campaign from the Rajputs to take at least some of the Indus Delta. This war didn't have as much at stake as the previous ones, but was still, by its very nature, an affront to Mughal pride. With the realm much stronger after its recent trials and tribulations, the Rajputs didn't stand a chance. After a few decisive battles and some occupations of the Gujarati Rajput border regions, the Mughals walked away with a much-needed win. On top of that huge win, Timurtas was even able to get Lahore back from that knight he granted it to, solidifying his rule as someone who will not be crossed even by his own bad decisions. At this point, the once infant Khan of Mongolia has grown into his own man, Chagatai. He's no Genghis, but he still commands the largest army on the planet and also seems to be at war with way too many people and losing. Nice job. It seems he also is universally hated, so it's time to assassinate him. Given that his heir is a little girl, his realm should fracture into a million pieces without his leadership. With the Mughals somewhat cut off from the rest of the Muslim world now, split between Mongols and Hindus, the Ghazis of Tilaka formed near Delhi as a holy order to protect Muslims and Islam from those who would harm it. In this case though, it'll mostly be used for offensive purposes, given that the Mughals didn't have much to fear around them, but you know, it's about optics. It was quickly after that the Mughal plot to kill Chagatai Khan succeeded, and the Kamag Mongol successor state was returned to division amongst the descendants of Temujin into the Ilkhanate of Anatolia, Persia, and the Mashriq, the Golden Horde of the Western Steppes, the White Horde of the Far West, the Chagatai Khanate of the Tarim Basin and Zungaria, and finally, the Mongol homelands around Lake Baikal. It's honestly a pretty majestic split, although we'll see how long any of these successor states stick around. Funnily enough, the Chagatai Khan is actually a Nestorian, so Christianity may have a renaissance in the east. The Ilkhanate Khan is Ash'ari, like the Mughals themselves, so they could perhaps prove a viable ally given time, although this new development makes the foundation of the Ghazis from before a little bit dubious. Oh hey, even the Golden Horde is Orthodox. It's a good day for Eastern Christians, so it seems. Now that the Mongols seem to no longer be a threat, Timurtas decided to finally advance further into the Gangetic Plain as a show of strength. His rule has been marred with a whiff of weakness, one which has, on a few occasions, intoxicated his vassals, and has led to unnecessary war with the Rajputs. It was time to put those doubts to an end and march against the Western Bengalis and make a stride towards becoming masters of the Grand Trunk Road and the Ganges River. This war was simple. The Bengalis simply didn't have the fighting spirit that the Rajputs put on display, and the Mughal armies had no trouble taking care of them. In fear of giving out land to potentially disloyal lords, he split his new conquest between his sons, Jahangir and Akbar. Jahangir, being the oldest, got the most fertile land by the river, and Akbar got the jungles with the most opportunity to prove himself. The children were still quite young, but there's never an age too young to make a name for yourself. The remaining land was given out to Urdu noblemen, who wouldn't be allowed to hold too much power for themselves. With how successful the campaign went, Timurtas advanced even further towards the Bay of Bengal. His final conquest, to prove himself to not just his subjects but all of Hindustan, was to invade the Bengali heartlands of the Ganges Delta and claim the illustrious farmlands there for his realm. The Bengalis, who had foolishly assumed the Mughals were too busy with the Rajputs to be concerned, were completely blindsided and swept aside like ants under Timurtas' elephantry. Before handing any titles out, Timurtas had to clear out the remaining Bengali lords who clung to their titles. The Mughal realm would tolerate neither heathens nor foreigners. They put up a resistance, but it was even more of a farce than the very war that put them into the realm to begin with. In this case, Timurtas established new royal families from unlanded lords in Punjab and would work to convert and assimilate the Bengalis. He also proclaimed himself the Sultan of Bihar and Bengal, adding those titles to all his royal proclamations. All that was left now was to claim the last piece of the Gangetic Valley that remained split between the Rajputs and the Mughals. With this war, Mughal control over the holiest river in India would be secured, and it would be a major blow. Timurtas cannot lose this war. In the Battle of Mahoba, the Mughals not only won a decisive victory, they also captured one of the Rajput princes and secured their war goal. With one last battle right alongside the river, the Mughals secured their victory. New borders were drawn, and from here on, no Hindu outside of the Mughal realm would have access to their holy river, and the blood of Hindus from the battle would pour into the river. To some, this was the ultimate form of unification of body and spirit, joining with the river, and to others, it was a little more macabre. Oh, and Timurtas made friends with his son, Akbar, because he's a good teacher. That's wholesome. Anyway, now that the Mughal Empire has expanded, Timurtas can finally rest, knowing that his realm respects him. No civil war would come up, nor would the Rajputs ever attack again, after the recent landslide victories. Although he was relaxing in his palace, the army was still looking for more fights, and so, mostly without the Sultan's purview, various lords and armies went to stake their claims over in Burma. Even some territory along the border of Rajasthan was up for grabs, and it looked like the relatively autonomous nature of the Mughal army was finally paying off. During these conquests, most of the Mongol successor states fell apart and left a huge power vacuum off in their once consolidated lands. Even the Caliph was free, living off in Azerbaijan. Sadly though, Jahangir, Timurtash's son, not his uncle, died from injuries he incurred during those campaigns against the Mongols, which was truly unfortunate given that he hadn't even had any kids of his own yet. His death shook Timurtash, although he knew he couldn't let one child's death bother him. The wars around the Indian subcontinent continued, and in between a recent batch of them, Timurtash went off on a Hajj to Mecca. Reaching almost 50 years of age, it was about time after all. Oh, and by the way, I didn't get notification for it in the game, but Uncle Jahangir actually died of a miscellaneous illness at the age of 65 in 1254. I actually didn't even realize he died until I was writing the script for this video and thinking about what happened to him. Turns out by this point in the script, he'd been dead for a couple years. Truly sad, but his advice and support of Timurtash is very much what allowed the realm to exist how it does now. Shortly after his trip to Mecca, Timurtash started to become ill himself. Hitting his 50th trip around the sun, it seemed his time was coming, although his realm was making moves of its own, whether he was involved or not. Sitting at 57 learning though, Timurtash was also one of the wisest rulers on the planet, and he had good enough knowledge of his body and its limits to keep himself alive for a bit longer to ensure that the realm was secure. After all, he still had some scores to settle with the Rajputs, his eternal rivals. Despite his content nature, Timurtash had inadvertently become perhaps the most ambitious sultan in his family, almost entirely due to factors forcing his hand. He did what he did to ensure that he would not be perceived as weak, even if he didn't personally revel in it. He did, however, come to resent the Rajputs for their constant weakening of his name with their posturing in wars. So for him, these wars weren't even about land or money or fame, they were about winning. Using nothing more than his men-at-arms, who he had been building up over the past few decades, he absolutely, unequivocally put the Rajputs in their place. After the outcome of that war, the armor which Timurtash once wore in battle started to get a reputation and became a renowned piece of armor. Indeed, that armor had been running in the family for a long time and became a symbol of the Mughal family's grip on North India. Yet North India wasn't good enough, as the ever-victorious Mughal armies simply couldn't be stopped. With the Mongols gone, the Rajputs humiliated, and the realm happy to stake claims in various Hindu territories, advances towards the Deccan Plateau began. Unfortunately, Akbar, who was involved in those wars, died suddenly of mysterious circumstances. Who had it out for him and why? That is lost to time, but Akbar was ripped away from Timurtash far too young. It would seem that Timurtash's only living son would be his relatively ignored son, Afsin, who held land off in Burma, granted to him as a throwaway nod at equality. In truth, Timurtash had mostly neglected his third son, who he considered to be more of a nuisance succession than a true asset. It turned out that Akbar's son, Aurangzeb, would be heir now, and luckily he seemed to have his head screwed on straight. Unfortunately, once again though, his head didn't stay on for too long, as he was assassinated by one of the Rajput princesses. This rivalry really just won't end. Timurtash made it his life goal for what remained of his life to wipe out the Rajputs, for revenge against them. He pinned the death of Akbar himself on them, despite only having evidence against them for Aurangzeb's death. The only son in line for the throne now was Afsin. Living a life of abject neglect from his father, Afsin grew into a strong man whose only real flaw was that he spent a little too much money at times. He learned to reach far, but carefully, and to meticulously carry out his plans no matter how underhanded. For all Timurtash knew, it could have been Afsin himself who set out to eliminate the true heirs, but that might be a bit too extreme of a conspiracy theory. Returning to Timurtash's campaign against the Rajputs, he used his lifetime of connections to the Muslim ulema to justify claims against nearly the entirety of the Rajput realm. This was going to be a war for the entirety of the Rajput homeland. If he couldn't outright end their realm, he would at least rob them of their homes. He would also seek to gain control over the river that feeds them, the Tapi River, passing through the massive port city of Surat. Much like the previous war, the Rajputs stood no chance against Timurtash's well-trained and maintained men-at-arms, who held nothing back and had no mercy. The Rajputs were exiled to what remained of Malwa. With more time, they'd eventually wiped off the subcontinent. Indeed, the conquest continued. Timurtash's anger towards the Rajputs seemed to extend even towards all the Hindus of India, and his work to convert the locals to Islam and to conquer the non-Muslim realms of the Deccan upped their aggression immensely. These holy wars were spreading across the Muslim world. Most of the fractured realms of Persia and the Mashriq couldn't tell if they ought to be afraid or be proud. But regardless of their reasons, many of them began offering their fealty to the Mughal Sultanate. Timurtash was happy to oblige them. Suddenly, the Mughals were no longer just an Indian empire. The rump state of the Rajputs finally fell in 1278, and Timurtash declared himself the new Sultan of the Rajputs, claiming all of their titles as his own. With that declaration, he declared himself something beyond a Sultan. He's not just the Sultan of the Mughals anymore. He's the Sultan of North India and the protector of Islam across the Middle East. He's the Sultan of all Sultans, the Padishah of the new Mughal Empire, which stretches from Armenia to Burma and from the Oxus River to Kerala. By taking on the title of Padishah, he was evoking the ancient Parthian empires, and even to some extent Alexander the Great, who claimed the title of Shahanshah when he defeated Darius. Finally, Timurtash thought, I can rest. He has avenged his family, secured the future of his legacy, and ensured that the Mughals will no longer have a rival, not for lack of ambition, but instead for lack of competition. No realm can match the Mughal might, nor can they match their arts and crafts. No realm can declare itself a rival to the Mughals, whose hegemony is assured even as Timurtash passes on, and his dark horse son, Afsin, takes the throne in 1280. There is an immense responsibility to take up when an heir has to live up to the accomplishments of his father. Anyone with a successful parent knows that. Sultan, no. Padishah Afsin Timurtasholu Gurkhani has to take on the role of Mughal Padishah after his father went from a local power in North India, plagued by internal and external strife, to the most powerful empire beyond even the Mongols. Speaking of Mongols, Afsin's first act as Padishah was to get on the good side of the Ulema, and he figured the best way to do that would be to restore the Caliph to his rightful splendor. Right now, the Caliph is a Mongol with just a single holding in Azerbaijan. This cannot stand. Instead, Afsin would appoint the Caliph as the new Shah of Persia and Jazeera, as well as granting him rights to tax and raise armies from all the vassals west of the Indus, although this did not include territories north of the Hindu Kush Mountains. For all intents and purposes, the Mongol Caliph was to be granted any territory located in the once illustrious Ilkhanate. Afsin had in mind that in order to succeed his father, he had to do something no one in history had ever done. Afsin would have to unite India and all of its realms into one. Given that his father had already done most of the work, it would perhaps be scandalous to claim he had united India and not his father, but ultimately, until the whole thing is conquered, how could anyone claim to be unifier of India? That being said, you have to wait for part 3, the final part of this series, to see that. You might be disappointed to see a third part, but to be frank, the lifetime of Timurtash II was so absolutely insane, I felt he deserved a video of his own. Remember that he ruled the Sultanate and later Empire for his entire life. From cradle to grave, Timurtash II controlled the most important and powerful Indian Sultanate of the region. Some say Timurtash II may have been the Mahdi, arriving to prophesize Jesus' return to Earth in the end times. Given that the Mongols were viewed as the bringers of the end times as far as the Muslim world was concerned, it made sense to view him in such a way. It leaves Afsin with some truly divine shoes to fill, and whether he can or not will be determined in next video. I expect the third part to be the final part, unless something absolutely crazy happens. I may even take this playthrough to 1453 if it's interesting enough, although it's rare that any CK3 game stays interesting that long. That's all for now. Thank you for your time.